Hello, hello, episode 241. We're recording this live on April 14th, 2022. This is Human Factors Cast. I'm your host, Nick Roome. I'm joined today by Mr. Barry Kirby.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm well. You have a new title, Barry.
I do. It's very exciting. I'm delighted to say that I'm now the president-elect of the Chartered Institute of Economics and Human Factors. And now I should have my own something now at the start of every show.
Yeah, you should. It's like King Barry Kirby, Sir Barry Kirby. What is there an official president-elect?
President-elect, yes.
Barry Kirby. Anyway, we got a great show. Not to glance over your achievements, Barry. Congratulations. We've got a great show for you tonight. We're actually going to be talking about how jetpacks might be used in the near future to save people's lives. And later, we're going to answer some questions from the community about how to push back on developer suggestions, advice for conducting asynchronous activities, and red flags when considering research turnaround time. But first, some programming notes. Hey, if you haven't already, we have put out that HFES Town Hall. This is the first official episode since we've put that out. We sat down, we had a conversation with HFES leadership. We were talking about all that fun stuff over at HFES, especially around outreach. You should go check it out if you haven't already. And Barry, I understand that you have some stuff going on at 1202, the Human Factors podcast. What's going on over there?
Yeah, so at 1202, I think the last time we were going to have this discussion, we just put out an episode around fire. This time, we're looking at agriculture. And we just recorded an interview with John Owen, who's basically is the research project manager at Gethley, which is a farm campus of a further education college here in Wales called Coleg Cigar. He was good enough to basically give me a bit of an insight about how they use an IoT and technology, sensor technologies in particular, about how to give farmers a bit of an edge into decision making, and then he gives a bit of background into the sort of decisions they need to make around weather and all that sort of stuff. So that's going to go live on Monday, and then you talk about HFES leadership. Next week, I'm recording an episode with none other than Chris himself, Chris Reed. So hopefully, if that all happens and goes ahead, then I'll be able to give you a bit of an insight from this side of the pond about what we think about HFES.
Is Chris the only person that we've both had on our podcast? Well, Tony. We both had Tony on it. Yeah.
Tony. Yes, I think so far.
There might be some other overlap.
But we'll change all that.
Yes, we will. One more update here. We are always taking excited volunteers for our Human Factors Cast Digital Media Lab. We got a lot of really fun stuff going on over there. In fact, we've just done a whole update on our lab infrastructure to make sure that transition for volunteers is a good onboarding process. If you are interested in helping communicate human factors, if you're interested in creating content that will help others digest human factors psychology in a way that is effectively communicated, I encourage you to reach out to us. We are always looking for folks. But we know why you're here. You are here for the news, so why don't we go ahead and get into it? I understand that people skip parts of the show. That intro is usually what people skip. So we're looking for people for the lab. I'm going to say it one more time just after that break. Anyway, we know why you're here. You're here for the news. Barry, what is the news story this week?
The news story this week is amazing. We're talking about jet suit paramedics ready for a summer liftoff. Really what we're going to hear is paramedics in the Lake District here in the United Kingdom hope to be using jet suits to reach medical emergencies this summer. Currently, they use helicopters that take around 25 to 30 minutes to reach a patient in the Lake District, once the crew has found an area flat enough to land. Once this program is operational, the jetpack operation, medics will be able to fly up a hill in 90 seconds, rather than taking that 30 minutes by foot that it takes to get there. The jet suit consists of two mini engines, one on each arm, and one on the back, allowing the pilot to control their movement just by moving their hands. We've all seen Iron Man. It can ascend quickly, saving valuable time by flying close to the land. There is a major advantage for using this technology in the Lake District, as the jet suit can be used in poor conditions, such as low visibility and strong winds, which would pose a challenge to a helicopter. And anybody who's been to the Lake District know that low visibility and strong winds are very common. The suits have also been proved to be effective in 35-mile-an-hour winds, and according to the data, could be used on 15 to 20 medical cases a week. Paramedics will need to fly with around 10 to 15 kilos or 20 to 35 pounds of medical kit, including a defibrillator, patient monitoring devices, which are strapped into pouches on the pilot's legs and chest. The idea is to get paramedics to patients in emergency care faster than ever, which could mean more people survive than expected if they normally had a longer response time. So, Nick, would you like to have the equivalent of a paramedic Ironman coming to save you in the Lake District?
Look, so let me first preface this by saying you and I, Barry, talked a lot last week on our Human Factors and Chill Human Factors Hangout about jetpacks. In fact, that's why we repackaged that as a separate podcast episode, because there was so much good discussion there about the human factors issues surrounding jetpacks, and we'll get to some of it today. So I want to preface it with that. But on the surface, this is an awesome premise. But as we kind of discovered last week, there's a lot of hoops that we need to jump through to get to the benefits that something like this could provide. Like I said, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but I am curious on what your initial thoughts on this are.
So yeah, we did go through a whole lot of stuff last week that I think is a whole 2 hours worth of content there, which was really good fun. But fundamentally with this, it feels on one hand part of me that feels very excited about we're playing with this sort of technology now, and it makes it. I made a couple of references to Iron Man. You watch things on the movies where they've done that sort of thing. It makes this technology is becoming accessible, but it also does feel like it's a bit of a fad. Like is it more risky than actually useful? Do you I think we need to step through a whole lot of the issues to work out, is this something that is actually truly going to save lives? Or do even take a step back, is going to make life easier for people? Or is it just going to look cool? Because who doesn't want to be a rocket man?
Yeah.
But I'm not, part of me my heart loves it. My head thinks this is, it's not as cool as it could be.
I think we're on the same page there. And let's paint the picture for our listeners here. This is an audio format podcast, so you actually have experience living in the Lake District, and it has some very unique properties. Can you just briefly describe what makes the Lake District unique and why they're trying this technology there?
Right, let's go with wet first. The Lake District is a very wet place. So the Lake District is north of England. So if you look at a map, it's basically the north west of England, just below the Scottish border, if you're in large handfuls. So it's in Cumbria, and it's a glaciated terrain, which means that through the Ice Age, when the glaciers moved through that part of the country, it created a rather unique terrain, which is good. So it's got lots of hills on it, very rugged terrain in that respect. It's in some respects, it's got some quite rolling hills, but then it's also got some quite sharp rock formations. Parts of it are very open and very barren, so that means that the wind is quite significant. When it truly gets into horizontal rain is quite well seen. But then, almost in the same day, you could have the rain roll back, the clouds roll back, and you get beautiful sunshine and fantastic scenery. Where a lot of people, so it's a heavy tourist destination, and so what makes it quite popular for why they have the mountain rescue teams there is people will often go walking thinking, it's a beautiful day, sling on a little backpack with maybe a bottle of water and a chocolate bar, and go wandering up the hill, because why not? It's a beautiful day, you can crack on and do that. But then they can get about halfway up, and suddenly again the clouds come back down. You lose where you're going, so you lose orientation. You don't have the right clothes with you, so you get wet through. You get cold. Hypothermia is very, very common, and so just because that changing nature of the weather combined with the with that terrain makes it a very unique place to be. You have normal mountain rescue teams that go out, that are all volunteer organizations that'll go out if you get a casualty on a hill, or even somebody's just in distress. The mountain rescue team will be the first ones on call to go out there, and they're normally just walkers themselves. They'll have special kit and perhaps a Land Rover, that type of thing. They'll go out and find casualties. But then if the casualty is severely injured enough, then you get the helimed come out, the helicopter medical team come out, and then will airlift casualties off. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into one of the areas of the UK that I actually consider to be the most beautiful part of the UK, but it can also be the most treacherous.
Right. So painting that picture really kind of illustrates why they're testing this there. There's a lot of really unique geological features that makes it difficult for search and rescue medical teams to get to folks who might be in precarious conditions. So let's talk a little bit about, since we're talking about the physical side of things, let's talk about the physical features of what a jetpack is, kind of rehash some of our conversation of last week. Some of the human factors issues with human factors and jetpacks in general. So just to kind of briefly describe this system again, I know it was in the blurb, but you have sort of a jet on each wrist, jets at each wrist, that help you control directionality, and then you have sort of one on your back that presumably controls thrust, upward thrust. And so you're able to, when you kind of move your body in certain ways, move forward, move backwards. You're right. We have all seen Iron Man. We kind of get the gist of how that might work. We saw him learning, crash on the car, robot, gets him with the fire extinguisher, all that stuff. That's kind of what's going on here, but without the comedy. And really, we're looking at kind of training in various stages where you have sort of this tethered state where you're kind of on a stage, you're tethered, you're kind of learning to control this. And I'm talking from the paramedics perspective here. You're learning to control this the suit. And once you've learned that, then you kind of go into the smaller scale tests of getting off of that tether and doing short jumps from point A to point B. And then once that's, once you've kind of mastered that, then you move on to the next stage, which ultimately leads you to being able to save people. And at some point along the way, you're going to have to, test it with all this equipment on you, all this kit that you have to carry, the defibrillator, the medical supplies, all that stuff. Barry, do you want to go through some of the usability issues of jetpacks and what that could mean for these operators?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth, so just to pick up on something you just said, if you, obviously this story is being supported by, underpinned by Gravity Industries, who have developed the jetpack, who've done that. And if you go to their website, they've got some good videos and YouTube links about the training process you have to go through. So it's worth having a look at that to see how you step through that. But if we were to focus directly on the task that is being used for here in terms of being a paramedic. So for me, the flight there is part of the story. So you imagine you're at the base, you get the call. So the helicopter team would then, if they to do a comparison, would then go and pre-flight checks, they would, the suit up, pre-flight checks, and get into the air. Now the same is going to be the same for you in a suit. That you've got to do, you've got to suit up. Presumably you're not walking around with this on all the time, because presumably it's weighty and uncomfortable. You probably need to fuel it up. It has a limited fuel range, though presumably that's going to get better. So as you've described, you have these thrusters on, these jets on, so 2 jets on each wrist and 1 on your back. That's right. So you've got to suit up. You've got to get all this kit, make sure you've got it there. You've then got to, when you get to your casualty, you've then got to be able to perform medical tasks. You've then got to be able to do something. So the pictures that we've seen show that these jets actually go down quite low down your hand, because you've got almost like a gauntlet on. So being able to then perform CPR, be able to dress a wound, be able to do anything like that, you presumably have to take this sort of stuff off or stash it in some way. So there's going to be a level of how do you do that, because presumably it's a jet, it's going to get hot. How do you stop the jet cowling touching you? Because you don't want to burn your hands off trying to get this thing off, and more importantly, probably you don't want to burn the casualty, because if you've got that there, then that's so fundamentally. Whilst if you get there quickly, but then you have to spend like half an hour taking this kit off and making it safe before you then perform medical interventions. Are you doing it any quicker? Don't know. You probably presumably take it off fairly quickly, I would like to think, and dump it at the side. But you get it there. So yeah, you need to be able to fly there. You need to be able to take it off, do stuff. What is the range of it? So they've talked about being able to fly for around, uphill in 90 seconds, which is great. You've got they talk about taking loads of kit with them that we said in the blurb. So presumably you'll be able to get there, take the thing off or make it safe or whatever that means. Get the right sort of kit out and apply it. But then I sort of then get into my safety case stuff, and there's two big things that worry me to a certain extent. Firstly, what happens if it goes wrong, or you forget how much fuel you've used? Because that I should imagine that if you're in a helicopter or even in a plane, if you run out of fuel, you've got glide or you can auto rotate or that type of thing. If you run out of fuel with wearing this suit and you're maybe in the Lake District, it's quite easy to be thinking that you're going quite low over the ground and then suddenly for a big valley to open up in front of you, or a crevasse, or a big rock formation. If you suddenly run out of fuel whilst you're in that position, you then turn into a very fast brick. And there's only you've got velocity, so you're going to hit something hard. But presumably, again, I assume we're gonna have cues, so you need some sort of cueing in the in some sort of either on your body or ideally is some sort of heads-up display, that what your range is, what your what any alerts that are going on. How are you going to know if there's an error in one of the thrusters and what impact that has on what you're doing. So how all that gets managed in a way that isn't just based on feel, because I can imagine that's how this is. You'd be able to feel if you're sort of losing thrust on one of your wrists, type of thing. Then the only other thing for me that I thought was interesting was around navigation. So you don't really know where you're going. You've had a phone call off a casualty or somebody who's with a casualty. A helicopter, when it flies up there, you've generally got at least 3 sets of eyes. You've got pilot, a co-pilot, and a medic in the back. Or even if you've just got 2, that's still 2 pairs of eyes. You'll have had a rough, presumably rough location, but then, as I said, the terrain can be quite bleak. And if you're in a closed in, as in the fog's rolled in or the mist rolled in, normally on your helicopter you've at least got the ability to sort of slow down, take your bearings, slowly do searches across the terrain until you find your casualty. I don't think you know where your casualty pinpointed your casualty is straight away, so your 90 seconds suddenly becomes way more than that. So if you're not getting there straight away and you run out of flight time, how does that work? Now there is solutions to that. So I guess I don't know whether I presume you have in the States the new What 3 Words app. So if you got what 3 words, that takes you down to a 3-meter triangle. So if that's built into the way it goes, then possibly that's a way of helping it. But again, you're going to need some sort of display to be able to sort of wayfind for you and things like that. So there are stacks of, I think, and I don't think any of this is insurmountable. This is just me being taking something that I'm very excited about and then breaking it down. So taking it out of my hat and putting it in my head, and doing the analysis that you'd look at and go but wait, because my head normally takes all the fun out of everything, and starts thinking about the what ifs and if we were to sit there and do a proper why analysis and all that sort of stuff and break this thing down, then I'm sure we can come up with loads of solutions to all of it. But I think that sort of thinking is why I feel it is still a bit of a fad. There's still a lot of work to be done.
I mean, honestly, we're working right now. We're trying to break this down from a practical standpoint of like, what are some of the challenges that they might experience here? And that was a really good overview of just the physical piece that is going on here too, right? I mean, we talked about some of the usability issues with the jetpack, and I think we recapped a lot of the stuff that we talked about last week. For more in-depth discussion, go listen to that. But honestly, there's much more going on than just the physical aspects of these jetpacks, right? You have sort of the mental side of it going on from the paramedics' perspective too. So not only are they pairing this with some of their traditional job responsibilities, now they have this whole other type of thing that they have to manage in navigating with a jetpack on. And so it's a different beast. And I thought it was a good idea for us to kind of go through and talk about some of the behavioral and human factors issues when it comes to first responders, and look at it through the lens of this story, and pair it with all these issues that we talked about with a jetpack too. So, first and foremost, right, these public health and safety workers, they have a broad range of health and mental health consequences because of the work that they do. Either exposed to natural or human caused disasters, or anything like that. And one of the top things that you'll see out of any sort of first responder is depression. It's so commonly reported, and rates of depression as well as severity kind of vary across studies. But there's a couple instances here where, in a control study of certified EMS professionals, depression was reported in 6.8 with mild depression, which was the most common type. And then you also have medical team workers who are responding to the Great East Japan earthquake back in 2011, where 21.4% of them were diagnosed with clinical depression. So it kind of ranges, but this is a very prevalent issue in which you have to consider. And when we'll get into the human factors sort of implications here in a little bit, but obviously, as we talked about in previous episodes, mental health has a huge impact on your performance and your stress levels when you are trying to perform certain duties. And we'll get to performance and all that stuff, safety, later. You want to talk a little bit about suicide?
Not really, but this is an obvious next step, because I mean, you're right. When you look at the whole depression side of things, it's no wonder when you consider the job that they're having to do, and they see people at their best, but also see people at their most vulnerable, and at the worst when things don't go right. So it's almost then no wonder that actually suicide ideation has been reported in first responders in a number of studies. But there are still questions around the rates, given the way data has been collected. But existing research does suggest that emergency medical responders personnel may be more likely than the general population to think about and attempt suicide. So there has been a literature review where suicide thoughts and ideation in EMS and paramedics were evaluated as compared to the general population. And that, based on the findings from the study, a lifetime prevalence rate of 28% for feeling that life is not worth living, 10.4% for serious suicide ideation, 3.1% for having actually had a past suicide attempt. So it is one of these things that obviously we don't want to focus on necessarily too much and overplay, but the environment that they work in, and the things they see and have to put up with, and the consequences, because not all of these trips end up in a happy ending.
Right.
And it's them that have to process that. And in many ways, you see it on a lot of programs where they almost it's that scoop and run thing. Is they bring people into the hospital and they often don't necessarily know what the outcome was until either much later, if they do at all. So it's having to process one after the other and then get ready for the next one.
Yeah.
On
And
that point, some HF issues.
yeah, well, there's obviously overlap between mental health and human factors issues, and I think one thing that this overlap really fits nicely in is kind of this stress and post-traumatic stress. So, I mean, if you think about some of these stress symptoms or PTSD symptoms that EMS personnel have reported, there's a number of studies that, when you look at what they're experiencing, right? So if you look at another lit review here, EMS and paramedics reported higher traumatic disassociation at the time of the Loma Prieta Bay Area earthquake in 1989 compared to police. So, even just looking at the differences between first responders. You also have a study in Germany where 16.8% of emergency physicians had probable PTSD. And then you have, a case control study among EMS professionals where stress was reported in 6%, where mild stress being the most common type. So even though it's mild, even though it's only in 6%, you're still introducing all these different factors into sort of the normal, I guess, everyday lives of these professionals. And one thing to consider is that they take it home with them, first off, and that can be really, really bad for home relationships, especially when you consider PTSD. And bringing it now back to the human factor side of things, when you consider stress, PTSD on the job, those can be huge performance sort of hits, right? If you're bringing stress, you're bringing PTSD, those can have a huge impact on performance. What about performance, Barry?
Well, performance in this field is significant, isn't it? Because it is literally life and death. They've got very high levels of performance and the need to repeat time and time and time again. So one of the core risk factors is the pace of their work. The first responders are always on the front line, facing highly stressful and risky calls. But that tempo, that always being always on and having to do it time and time again, can lead to an inability to integrate work experiences. So again, according to a study, 69% of EMS professionals have never had enough time to recover between traumatic events. So therefore, as a result of that, depression, stress, and post-mortem PTSD, suicide ideation, and a host of other functional relational conditions have been reported. So what we need to look at here is understanding how is everything that we doing here then going to relate back to them actually being able to do the job and being able to do it. What does a good performance look like? We see it in hospitals as well, where you have doctors and surgeons working on working on patients when they're been on 12, 14-hour shifts, but yet we still expect a high level of performance out of them.
Right.
So
yeah,
do we want to move on to risk and protective factors?
Well, one sort of really important thing here too with the tempo, right? This is critically important when you think about what we're trying to accomplish with this jetpack story, right? We're trying to get to them quicker and thus reducing the amount of time it takes to respond. And so we have to consider this when training these individuals or, setting them up to respond to some of these situations. You need to increase the distance temporally between the time that they pick somebody up and the time that they go out to do it again, because already if you're looking at sort of this not having enough time to recover between events and you're making it faster, you really need to slow it down and have somebody else do it. And that's, you need to train a lot of people to do it so that way you can trade off the responsibilities. But yeah, let's talk about risk and protective factors, and specifically during some of these disastrous events. This is more of sort of a broad overview. You're probably not going to have, hopefully, knock on wood, not going to have disastrous natural disasters or human man-made disasters in the Lakes District. But if this technology starts, expanding outside of it, this could be something to consider. So you have risk factors during these disastrous events for first responders, and they could be either related to the disaster or the event itself, right? Any one of these things could cause stress, post-traumatic stress, any of these things, impact on performance. So if you take another lit review, we're bringing a lot of lit reviews here. We've done our research today. You have sort of these psychological outcomes from these stressful events. You have stress, uh, general well-being, mental disorders, resilience, personal growth, all affected when considering these humanitarian aid workers or similar professionals who are deployed to assist with the aftermath of a disaster. And what they found is that the proximity to that epicenter of the disaster is associated with higher levels of mental health issues. So if you have a jetpack and you're able to get to that the epicenter of the disaster first, there might be some additional considerations that you have to make there for these professionals who are operating in that manner. Likewise, there's other studies here that when you work long hours in unfamiliar or demanding circumstances, not taking a day off each week led to, surprise, fatigue, mental distress, job dissatisfaction, and subjective health complaints. So again, when you have sort of these humanitarian crises where you need people to go out, perform duties in situations that are not normal, you're going to have some additional demands there to think about. Then you also have, I guess, the somewhat obvious and tragic dealing with serious injuries or bodies of people, resulting in sort of this higher probability of developing PTSD, depression, alcohol problems, all this stuff, anxiety. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the job duties or qualities during these events?
Yeah, so during a disaster or an event, then the job qualities or qualities during it were associated with elevated risks of mental health issues. So not having enough job-related information, added extra or unfamiliar or conflicting duties onto basically too many people to look after and supervise. Direct survivor or family contacts, longer assignments, longer time working with children, working with clients who basically discussing morbid materials, excessive exposure to gory sights and sounds, environmental hazards, and working as mental health workers, all of that associated with increased skill levels. Then you bring into that poor leadership, lack of interagency agreement. They're all seen as additional stressors during a disaster period, and so that gives you low perceived safety. Low perceived safety is also associated with increased levels of depression and anxiety and other psychiatric symptoms.
Yeah, and the last piece here is kind of leadership, right? Or lack of direction during these events. And so that sort of leads to safety too, because if you don't have leadership, you don't have sort of this perceived safety of having somebody who knows what they're doing. And because of that, you're kind of increasing the levels of depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric symptoms. But when you don't have that safety, when you don't have leadership, that is critical for when you're operating in these type of high risk environments, because safety is everything. It could lead to potentially more death, right? What if you slip up and accidentally burn your victim with your jetpack on? It's a lot to consider, and there are some things after a disaster too, like all this stuff that we talk about is really, you're going to take this home with you. And so the more that we can do to help train these individuals or establish processes, procedures in place that will help reduce some of these mental health issues with first responders, that will help with the usability of the jetpack. Even if something's easier to use, they're going to be less stressed doing it because they'll feel confident doing it. All this together kind of paints the picture of this very complex issue of giving paramedics jetpacks. Now, let's kind of bring it back to the article. Barry, I want to make sure that we have some time to hit some closing thoughts, because we did have a lot of thoughts on this. So what are some things that you want to take away from this?
So I guess there's a little, I sort of painted a bit of context about the train and stuff that this thing's got to work in. But we've also got to think about how the context that this is being run in. So the trials on this started in September 2020, but obviously COVID, as with everything, took the joy out of everything. And they've also had difficulty in finding sponsors to cover the cost. Now that's really important, because in the UK, air ambulances are all charities. They're not ran as part of the National Health Service or anything like that. And so they're all funded by donations. Now, if you think about how much that costs and the advantage it gives you, et cetera, the running this as a trial is going to use up them funds on this. So how are we going to justify that cost to people who are giving to the charity? So far, one member of the Great North Air Ambulance has completed their training using the suit unassisted, and they're going to get a couple of more on board. And it will give you, as we mentioned earlier, quite a significant performance increase. So if we talk about, just in terms of being able to reach a casualty, they're going to be up towards that casualty in 90 seconds rather than that 30 minutes. Fantastic. But I sort of, in another part of the article, I thought there was a bit of a sort of concerning quote where they say it's a machine that's attached to your body. You have to find the balance point, and we're in a job where we challenge ourselves. There's a lot of pressure on us to make it work, but it has a real purpose to get to people who need urgent medical care. It'd be lovely to enjoy it, but we have a job to do at the end of the day. Now, I have a problem with that quote, because it feels like they're being told that you have to make this work, otherwise people are going to die.
Right.
And are we trying to force a technology that may or may on the face of it could be brilliant, as we talked about 2 hours last week. We think we're all fan of jet suits, but when we're forcing a solution like this is when accidents happen. This is when we could have some serious consequences. So that for me is not only just waving a red flag. I've got two red flags in each arm and two red flares going off.
Right.
That concerns me. I don't know. What about you, Nick? What are your sort of takeaways?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. This to me feels more like, oh, we have a technology, let's use it. In fact, I'm going to pull up a quote here from the Great North Air Ambulance director, who has completed this training himself. We're still awestruck by it. Everyone looks at the wow factor and the fact that we are the world's first jet suit paramedics. But for us, it's about delivering patient care. When I started as a paramedic, I never thought I'd be working with a helicopter, never mind this. So, I mean, if you think about that, to me, it sounds like they are more impressed by the technology and the pairing of it with paramedics than they are concerned. I'm not saying the goal obviously is to save people's lives. I'm not saying that it's ill-intentioned. I'm saying that I think maybe the way that we're talking about it needs to shift ever so slightly into yes, it will save lives, but we also have to consider at what cost. And really kind of the last bit for me is just that this is going to be, if this ultimately comes out of trial and becomes the norm, at least in this district, others will follow suit. And so I feel like this is the opportunity to get best practices, processes, procedures in place before you start doing it at scale, because there's going to be a lot of lessons learned and a lot of human factors issues and safety issues, especially if we don't learn those lessons early on.
I think what you're saying there is that there needs to maybe be some human factors involvement at this early stage of making sure you're running trials and highlighting those issues through maybe a good human factors assessment, a bit of human factors integration, maybe. Is that what you're hinting at?
Yeah, and you do consulting, right?
Well, I'm sure we both could do a really good job on this, right?
Yeah, we just gave them a bunch of ideas. Well, thank you, thank you to our patrons this week for selecting our topic, and thank you to our friends over at the BBC for our news story this week. If you want to follow along, we do post the links to all the original articles on our weekly roundups in our blog. You can also join us on our Discord for more discussion on these stories and more. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to see what's going on in the human factors community right after this.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our weekly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and Human Factors Minute, a Patreon-only weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.
Yes, huge thank you as always to our patrons. Especially want to thank our honorary Human Factors Cast staff patron, Michelle Tripp. Patrons like you keep the show running. Thank you so much for your continued support. Okay, I know most of you will skip over this part. I keep mentioning this because now we have advanced analytics. I can tell when you're skipping. So I'm going to say don't skip here because this is really important. This is really cool. I'm going to talk a little bit about our lab and what we do, because we get a lot of questions about this, actually, from folks who are interested in learning more about the lab or just curious what we're doing. One thing that I don't think is immediately obvious is that we're not always putting stuff out into the world. And so people are wondering, what y'all doing over there in that lab? We have a lot of different things that we're tracking and trying to accomplish over here at the lab that you don't see. And one thing that I want to mention is that kind of our mission, if you will, is to kind of provide solutions to communicating human factors principles in an easily digestible way. And the podcast is one of those, and it's certainly born out of that. But it is one of those passion projects for me because traditionally, and I'm not pointing any fingers here, human factors has been communicated by old, crusty white dudes. And you know what? I have a problem with that because, okay, I'm not talking about you. I said I'm not pointing fingers. But look, here's the thing. It's like there's sort of this rift almost between academia and industry, and I want to bridge that rift. I want academia to see industry as a serious thing. I want industry to respect what academia has done to pave the way for some of this research. And so I don't think they always see eye to eye. Trying to bridge that gap, build a community of like-minded individuals who share a passion of human factors. And to do that, we're really experimenting with different formats behind the scenes here. We have podcasts, we have blog articles, we have other types of content that we're putting out there into the world to communicate these things effectively. And, one of our goals is to really reach people where they are. If you've ever seen a YouTube video pop up that's adjacent to the thing that you're looking on, and it says Human Factors Cast, how giving paramedic jetpacks can stop people from dying. That's what we want to do. We want to pop up in those recommendations as a way to say, look, you enjoy this stuff. What's human factors? Because a lot of people don't know what that is. It is truly a confluence of many different things. We want to get behind it. And so, there are a lot of perks for being in the lab. Obviously, it'll give you experience working on stuff, build up a portfolio of demonstrable results for things like university applications, future work in industry, that type of thing. You also get to work with some of the industry standard tools that we're using behind the scenes here. We have a lot of really experienced folks in the lab that can mentor you and help you connect with networks. So that's another benefit there. And you know what? We have a roadmap for benefits. So just if you're thinking about it at all, maybe consider reaching out to us. We'd love to have you. We're always looking for passionate people who want to communicate human factors. Anyway, that's my spiel. I think it's time that we get into this next part of the show we like to call...
It came from...
That's right. It came from... this is where we search all over the community to find you topics that the community is talking about. If you find any of these answers useful, no matter where you're at, please give us a like wherever you're watching. Help other people find this content. So we have 3 questions today. They're all from Reddit. They're all from the user experience subreddit, which has been on a roll lately with some of these really good questions. This first one here is by herikoriko. I hope I said that right. They say, how do I kindly push back on a suggestion made by a developer? I'm new to the organization, so I'm still building relationships. The default design can't be done due to technical and time constraints, so the development team suggested an alternative, which is functional but isn't great from an experience design perspective. How do I push back while still keeping the working relationship positive, if that makes sense? Barry, I'm sure you've never encountered this in your life.
No, in fact, I've got no idea. Yeah, if only. I mean, I think this is business as usual for any human factors UX practitioner, really, isn't it? The dev will always, there is always going to be and I think it's actually quite a healthy thing, a positive tension between everything that the design that we want to achieve in the design. We want everything that we possibly can to work for the user, and that's why we exist. The dev wants to get the code written in the best possible way, in the most efficient way, and to make it work from their perspective. And the best comes out of that healthy tension between the two. So whenever you meet a new dev, it's always difficult because for, I would say, a good chunk of organizations, the devs still are given probably more respect than us as HR practitioners or UX practitioners, and so they tend to carry a bit more weight behind their opinions. Not everywhere, and some, I dare say, some places are different, but certainly in my experience is that is the case. But all you can do is do what we do, which is put forward the argument, put forward your proposal and why. You don't have to do it in an antagonistic way. You don't need baseball bats or anything. It is literally just put forward your reasoning. If you've done your done the research, or the research exists, you should have the evidence behind you to say why you're proposing what you're proposing, or why their proposal isn't going to work. Normally, if you're just going to say that's rubbish, it's not going to work, that generally won't float very well. You need to come up with a counter proposal. So just saying that's not going to work, I find doesn't get very far. That doesn't work. But if you tweaked it and did this, tends to get a better reception. So I think you can do all that in a positive way. You don't have to be nasty about it. I don't think you have to do any of that. If you come forward in, basically be proactive about what you're delivering, but don't be too subservient either. You're equally as important in that relationship as what they are. So just because you're new to the organization doesn't mean that you shouldn't put your opinion forward. What do you think, Nick? How do you deal with this one?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's a couple really important considerations here. So, one, they say it's not able to be done because of technical and time constraints. And one piece of advice that I would offer in this situation is pick your battles. Is this going to be something that is going to have a negative impact on the user? If not, is it really that important? And I know that is kind of counterintuitive to what we, as human practitioners, are wanting to do. But I think it's important to consider, because especially if you don't have the clout in the UX, in the company, that is something to consider. Is it going to be mission critical that they get this right, or can it slide? You say it's functional. It isn't great from a user experience design perspective, but it's functional. Is there another battle that you want to pick that's a better, thing to pick? So I'm going to argue that you might not even want to push back in this case. Is it really important? I mean, try. Say, hey, look, I really think it should be like this. If is there any way we can make it work? Obviously, push back, but don't be so pushy that, I don't know, it does develop that friction between you and somebody that you'll potentially work with for a while. That's my 2 cents. All right, let's get into this next one here. This one's advice for conducting asynchronous activities by ginpiggy on the user experience subreddit. At my company, our project design team wants to conduct a journey mapping workshop and include people outside of our team as well. So this is like clients, stakeholders, etc. But because we're in different countries, time zones are hard to deal with. Any advice on asynchronous workshops or asynchronous workshopping that still gets everyone on the same page? Barry, do you have any experience with this?
Yes, not so much because of time zones, but because of different organizations and basically access to a user community that isn't always around. Fundamentally, it's about good organization and having software that is common across everybody and you can access. So for us, when I've done this before, I've done it in 2 levels, which is actually works with something that was going off around Twitter today around the use of PowerPoint and slides. So if you basically put the journey map through a set of slides, you Google, PowerPoint, Microsoft, whatever, choose your poison, but then make that available on a network with a header slide that exactly depicts what it is you want your the other stakeholders to do on that journey and the time period that they've got to do it. So basically a good instruction slide. Give everybody a way of annotating themselves. So if you want to track that sort of thing, I've done it both ways, where one project I did and one project I actually wanted it anonymous, but get people to write it in whatever they're adding in different colors, so you can track the evolution. And over say a 72-hour period or whatever time period you're using, give them that time period to do it. Then at the end of the time period, so say it's 24 hours, at the end of the 24 hours, you then go back and review it and come up with a consolidated set of comments to allow you then to go through another cycle. It's slow or slower. You don't get the interaction between people like you would in a face-to-face workshop. There are things you can do around that, I've seen suggestions about recording voice notes, about recording bits of video to maybe do some of your to explore some of your rationale and things like that. They don't tend to work out in my experience. Other people might find them better. The best thing I found is actually just leaving comments in the PowerPoint slide. So when you normally do a review, use the review comments to add notes in for your justifications if you feel that fits. I just find that most people don't watch bits of video and listen to it, but that might just be the domain that I work in. Yeah. So that's kind of it from in terms of it's a longer, more drawn out process. You have to be on top of your admin to make it work, because everybody has to have a fair crack at the whip. Everybody has to know what they're doing without you being able to be there in person briefing them about it. So if you get your admin right, it can work. And yes, make it so, but just get your admin up to scratch. Nick, what about you? Have you got experience in doing this?
No, I'm curious. This was one of those ones that I picked out of genuine curiosity. There's, I have a need to do asynchronous work, and there's the traditional sort of asynchronous user tools for things like usability studies, all that stuff. Like I can name a couple names, but I think the interesting thing to me is, yes, you're right. This requires a lot of setup, and I just do want to stress that the setup is probably the most important part here. Because doing the thing that you just said, setting up in very clear instructions, how do you make sure people read those instructions is another question. But if you have the idea there, or at least you could attend like the start of each of these things, you could get people going. I don't know. There's got to be ways out there. If you know, let us know. All right, this last one here. Is it a red flag to anyone else if a company says they tend to have 1 week turnarounds for research? This is by PoorPouf on the user experience subreddit. Hiya, I'm a senior UX researcher, and I sat down for a panel interview for a position where I would essentially be building up the research department from the ground up with a lot of focus on discovery, exploratory research. The lead researcher from another group owned by the company asked what I would do if I had a week to conduct research, and I answered honestly with, good research takes time. They didn't like that answer at all. I'm already employed, so I'm not worried if I get the job or not. But I just want to check in to see I'm not crazy for suggesting more time for research. Barry, is 1 week enough time?
No. There we go. Again, okay. Well, we need it depends button. If we've got things lined up, so you have a user pool, you've got things are planned out, or things that are easy to access and put in front of a user community. You don't have to do all of the, because the stuff that takes time is recruiting your user pool, is generating the prototypes that are in a fit state to engage with it. Or if you're doing your more basic research, that, because you just say it's more generative research, to be able to go and do that sort of research, there is organization that to deliver that in 5 days is incredibly difficult. So I think fair play. Go back and yes, ask for the ask for them questions and see what you get. If they're not willing to play, then really, how comfortable do you feel about that job? Is that, some people would see that, and I've worked with some people who see that as a challenge. And let's say, yeah, I like the fast pace of that. And maybe you could develop processes, but yeah, I think that's a bit tight. 2 weeks, I think, would be, I'd be playing with, but I think a week is pacey.
It also depends on the scope, right? The default time of research, I say, is 2 months, and that is by design. If you are looking for a scope on a big project, I say 2 months, because that gives me time to talk to you, to organize meetings, to come up with some of these requirements for research, and then actually talk to the people that need to participate in the research, organize all those times. It really depends on scope. Are you doing user interviews? Are you doing a survey? It's very different. Do you have a user base or not? And so, I think a week is way too quick. That's my 2 cents. I don't really feel like adding more to this. It feels way too quick. What are you going to do? Monday, you set up the study. Tuesday, you send it out. Wednesday, you get some back. Thursday, you analyze, and Friday, you present. That is way too, it just seems way too accelerated to me.
There is an interesting bit in there that you've actually just, the way you just done that out made me think. Google actually have the Google Agile approach. They have a 5-day sprint process that they detail on a day-by-day basis what you should do. It's not directly generative research, but it is maybe something that could be applied in this situation. I don't know. I'd have to go look at the book again.
But I mean, you could even take that 5-day agile thing and plan it out, like 1 week planning, 2nd week recruiting, 3rd week executing, 4th week analysis, 5th week. Like, that is, to me, what a more standard cycle is. Maybe I'm old school. I don't know. Let's hear from you all. All right. I'm tired of talking about this. Let's get into one more thing. One more thing. It's just where we talk about whatever. Barry, what is going on with you?
So this week, I'm just going to highlight the fact we mentioned a while ago I was going to get a new electric car. I was all very excited and all that sort of stuff. And it was going to come in like a couple of weeks ago. Well, a couple of weeks have gone by. I still haven't got it. Turns out I'm not going to get that car after all, because when they promised me that I was going to get such and such a car, which I was very excited about, they've now run out of them. And I'm not. If I kept with that, I wouldn't get it till January. So we've done a bit of a bait and switch, and I'm hopefully going to get a car in, I think, about 6 weeks time, which I'm getting the new Ford Mustang. So I'm very excited. So the Mustang Mach-E. So I'm quite excited about that, but I'm now not holding my breath because I kind of feel I might get disappointed later on. So I thought I'd just have a little moan about that, around the fact I'm not getting the car I wanted, but I'm hopefully going to get a Mustang, which is actually quite exciting.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you have a couple backups just in case the Mustang doesn't work out.
Yeah, we'll see. I might just go back to the first one and wait till January for it.
At that point, right.
What about you?
For me, we're getting organized over here at the lab. I mentioned it during the break, coming back from the break. There was sort of a lack of effectiveness with the pills this week, and it led to some hyperfixation on my part, and through that resulted some productivity and some late nights, but it worked out in my benefit. So it's weird because normally hyperfixation occurs when I am sitting at my desk and like carving up old water bottles with my X-Acto knife that I have here. Like that is what it usually results in, but this time it was kind of more dedicated towards actually being productive, and that was nice. Anyway, journey's non-linear. Well, that's going to be it for today, everyone. If you like this episode, since we talk so much about the mental health of first responders today, I'll encourage you all to go listen to episode 236, where we talk about how we can better define mental health. Why don't you go ahead and give us a comment wherever you're listening on what you think of the story this week. For more in-depth discussion, you can always join us on our Discord community. We're always chatting in there. Visit our official website, sign up for our newsletter, stay up to date with all the latest Human Factors news. If you like what you hear, you want to support the show, there's a couple things you can do. One, leave us a 5-star review. That is free for you to do. And I think right now, if you go to Podchaser and leave us a review there, they'll donate 25 cents for every review left to the efforts in Ukraine. So go do that. You can always tell your friends about us. And that is also free for you to do. Just let them know that you listen to the show and that it's a good thing. Or 3, if you have money and want to give us money to support the lab, you can always support us on Patreon. As always, links to all of our socials and our website are in the description of this episode. I want to thank Mr. Barry Kirby for being on the show today. Where can our listeners go and find you if they want to talk about how they can be saved via Jetpack?
You can find me on Twitter at Baz_K or any other socials. Also, you can hit up some of my interviews on 1202, the Human Factors podcast, which is at 1202podcast.com.
As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me across social media at Nick_Roome. Thanks for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time, it depends.